Hello, and welcome to the Dissing My Ability podcast. I am your host, Ken Meeker, certified professional coach and owner of Vitality Career Coaching. For this episode, I am really excited to introduce a very, very close friend of mine. In fact, I consider her family. We've known each other so long. We had been talking about something that's very close for both of us and near and dear to both of our hearts. We got into a conversation about mental health, and that's when I invited my friend on, and fortunately she agreed. I'm really looking forward to the conversation that we're going to have today because I think it's a very important one. So without further ado, I would like to introduce the audience to my very close friend, April Alexander. Welcome.
Well, thank you, Ken. First of all, thank you for having me. As he said, we've known each other for a very long time. I'm not going to say how long. I will say that I think Wilson Phillips was on the top of the charts. So that should give you guys an idea.
Actually, I think it might have been after we met, but we
Yeah,
don't
you
need to
might be
go. We don't
right.
need to go there.
Yeah, we won't go there. Yeah, you guys have an idea. So, yes, as he was saying, we were discussing mental health. We had a really good conversation the other day, and he and I discussed this a lot. I have been experiencing generalized anxiety disorder since I was 19 years old. And it's something that, affects me daily. It can come in waves. It can be very minor, or it can be absolutely debilitating. I just thank you for inviting me on the show so we can have a conversation about it.
Yes, thank you for coming on. One of the things that, I mean, you and I have talked about a lot about this kind of stuff because we both suffer from similar conditions. We both have anxiety, and, I suffer from clinical depression, something I've had a long time. Mental health in and of itself is something that people don't discuss openly enough, I don't think. Granted, the dial's moving in the right direction over the last few years, but I think on an individual level, there's a sense of embarrassment, a sense of shame, and you just kind of want to, speaking for myself here, hide because you don't want to feel the way that you feel because it doesn't feel good.
Yes. Well, and I was going to say, it's hard to admit, not only to yourself, but to your loved ones, because there is such a stigma around it. And there isn't a good conversation about it. We focus mostly on physical health, and mental health tends to fall through the cracks. And you see it every day. And it's something that I think was ignored for so long because it's invisible,
Yeah.
that people were just afraid to talk about it because they thought that they were alone and they were the only ones experiencing this, and they were, quote unquote, not strong enough to deal with it.
Yeah, there was, I think there still is to a large degree that nobody wants to be labeled, oh, they're crazy, and I hate that word, but there's still sort of that attitude out there in large swaths of society that if you have any sort of mental illness, whether it be depression, whether it be anxiety, whether it be bipolar disorder, any number of conditions, that you're going to be labeled as crazy or something like that. And that only adds to the sense of shame and the sense of that you have to hide. And that prevents people from getting the treatment and the help that really can make all the difference in the world.
Absolutely. I was diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder when I was 19. And it was adult onset. I never experienced it as a child. And I was experiencing a lot of change at 19. I was going to school in Texas. I was out there by myself. I was a music major and had discovered that I didn't want to do music as a career for the rest of my life, but I was out there on a music scholarship. So, it caused me to question a lot of things in my life, including my identity. And somehow during this time, anxiety creeped in. It started becoming part of my everyday life. And I was scared because I didn't know how to deal with it. We didn't have those conversations growing up. It wasn't something that you heard about in the media much at that time. Finally, in desperation, I made an appointment with the local therapist on campus. And I was able to finally talk to somebody and explore these feelings that I was having when I thought I was losing my mind and I was very much alone. But it still took me several years to admit that I needed more than just therapy, that I also needed medical treatment for it. But it was something that was very hard for me to admit and hard to come to terms with. And I think that that is one of our biggest problems in society is it's okay to say that you're not okay. And that's
Absolutely.
something that has only come to the forefront recently, I think.
Absolutely, absolutely. And, just as a testament to how long I've known you, I remember that period. I remember when you went to school out in Texas. And I remember how, as your friend and someone who cares about you deeply, as your friend, you felt withdrawn,
Mm-hmm.
and it was like, as I didn't know about that you had anxiety for years. And I was one of your closest friends, or I am one of your closest friends. And
Yes.
so, similar to my own situation, had no idea I had anxiety for a very, very, very long time until, in fact, I was diagnosed as clinically depressed back in the 2000s, but anxiety didn't get diagnosed until after I encountered my disability, because it got so intense that it's like I would throw up if I was in a crowd. And so,
Yes.
obviously that was a significant change. Sometimes we don't know why we feel the way we feel. And so without having these kind of conversations out in the open to where people are like, oh, I identify with that. I feel that way sometimes. By having these discussions out in the open where people can feel seen and heard, and that at some point in most people's lives, I think something is going to happen, whether it be trauma, whether it be the death of a loved one, whatever happens, some period of point in their life, they're going to need some sort of help, whether it be from
Absolutely.
clergy, whether it be from a therapist, whether it be a counselor, from somebody. As you and I have talked about many, 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 many times, I think the world would benefit if everyone had therapy at least a little bit in their life.
Yes. I completely agree. I mean, I love my therapist, and it's amazing how much better I feel, even if we, touch on things that are difficult to face. It gives me the tools to be able to function and function better on a daily basis. And more people, if they had access to a therapist, I think we would see a huge change in this country, and, make this a national conversation about mental health. It affects me, not just me, but what I do for a living. I'm in human resources, and it's hard to have anxiety disorder when you're in the people business
Yeah.
because you, you don't always feel like seeing people.
Oh, yeah.
You don't feel like talking to people. And what it's allowed me to do, it's been a blessing in disguise because I have empathy. It has helped develop my emotional intelligence because I'm able to see others when they're struggling and recognize it.
Yeah.
Where, if you have an employee and they've been an excellent employee, and suddenly they're not showing up to work on time, their productivity goes down, they start missing a lot of work, rather than chalk it up to laziness or, oh, they just don't want to be here. Ask the question, dig a little deeper. Are you okay? Is everything okay at home? How can we help you want to come to work and enjoy what you do and feel safe here?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's critically important because something's going on that caused that to happen. If you show up and you chastise somebody for, oh, well, here's the consequences of your action, that only adds to that anxiety, that whatever is going on, it only makes it that much worse.
Yes.
And, something that often happens, especially, with depression or with a loss of a loved one or any number of things that can happen just in our normal lives. Our mental health isn't something that's it's not static. It doesn't stay the same. It goes up, it goes down. There's peaks and valleys. If we're afraid to have those conversations and address it in a way that is compassionate and constructive, being in HR, if the person, say a different person in HR, you have an employee that shows up and the situation you explained, basically,
Mm-hmm.
where they're, somebody who had been a really high performer, all of a sudden they're not showing up, their production is down, whatever it might be. And you have somebody bring them into the office and they write them up instead of saying, hey, we have this benefit plan that's part of our insurance for mental health.
Exactly.
the difference that that can make in somebody's life is like, it's almost black and white.
Absolutely. I mean, when you reach out and you're compassionate and you try to put yourself in their shoes, you're able to offer them a solution rather than punishing them. And like you said, it's mental health has peaks and valleys. There's nothing linear about it. I think with the recent COVID pandemic, we're seeing a lot of mental health issues at the forefront because people were isolated for almost 2 years. And that adds to anxiety, social anxiety.
Yeah.
Suddenly people don't want to leave their houses anymore and they don't want to be out in public. Or they've craved that for so long and it started to affect them and where they're suffering from depression and they no longer feel like doing the things that they used to enjoy. And I think that that's one thing we need to look at, especially in the workforce, is, we're in the middle of the great resignation and companies are looking on better ways to retain their employees. And one of those ways is to offer that mental health benefit. Offer them 3 free visits, 8 free visits, whatever you can afford. Make sure that mental health is included in their overall benefit package, because I think if people had access to it, they would utilize it a lot more.
I agree. And I think oftentimes people are unaware that it's a benefit
Yes.
as well, because I know, insurance is on a state by state basis or whatever, but I think from an overall standpoint, I think most insurance plans have some type of benefit for it, at least, even if it's just a tiny one for mental health, because I think it's mandated by the Affordable Care Act. I'd have to double check on that, but you would know better than I do. Circling back to how it kind of has affected you on an individual level. How has the anxiety sort of manifested? How is it manifested? And this is the Disigmability podcast. How has it gotten in the way of whether it be something you wanted to do, something you want to accomplish, a goal, or your relationships? How has that anxiety and not facing it head on been a hurdle? And how did you move through those times when it really became a barrier?
Wow, that's a great question. It started out with a lot of negative self-talk. So, I think everybody's experience is different. So I know that this is very unique to me, but, starting at 19, it was a lot of negative self-talk, like, wow, you can't follow through with anything. You go out there to be a music major and look, you're failing at that, or, and you start to tell yourself this narrative and that you're unworthy, that no matter what you do, you're not going to be able to accomplish your goals. And you just get stuck in this cycle. And that cycle stayed with me until my early 20s because I wasn't addressing it. I was self-medicating with alcohol. And that will, immediately start to tear away at your relationships, whether it's family, friends, relationships. And so when I finally got medical help and got on medication, I was able to take a step back and really work on that negative self-talk and, ask myself, what proof do you have that you're so bad? I would try to change the narrative in my head. And so I would say that, that's the way it first manifested. As, my life continued, I was able to manage my anxiety pretty well until COVID-19. I had a medical crisis several years ago where I was hospitalized due to respiratory failure.
Mm-hmm.
And so when there's a pandemic that is happening that is causing very similar symptoms that could possibly kill me, I immediately started going down the rabbit hole of, oh my gosh, I'm going to get sick. I'm not going to be able to make it. I'm not, and that anxiety started to take over my life. And it got to the point where, once a lot of the restrictions lifted and I was back at work, I was still very anxious all the time, not necessarily about COVID, but just in general. And it started affecting me where I struggled to get out of bed. I struggled to, connect with friends and family, to return text messages or phone calls. And I struggled at work. I didn't have the patience that I normally did for, solving problems with people. And it was hard for me to face these people when my brain is going, 1,000 different directions at once. And that's when I reached out to my current therapist, and she has helped me tremendously. And I started doing more positive self-talk. I started reading books that I could relate to that would calm my nerves. I started studying Stoicism. And a combination of those things changed my life. And I was able to kind of turn the obstacle of anxiety disorder into a path where I could recognize that in my coworkers and be able to help them. But it's something that, I'll never be cured of. And it's something that I'll have to fight through every day.
Yeah. I had a therapist, a few years ago that I saw after my mother passed away. One of the things that I'm very grateful to that therapist for is he enabled me to change my thinking and my mindset about anxiety, because anxiety is one of those things where it doesn't feel good to be in that place. And so we try to shove it away. We try to push it away. We try to stuff it. We're like, I don't like feeling this way. So I'm going to do everything I can to pretend it doesn't exist and try to push it away. And the more that we do that, the more it grows. Yes. And it just increases and it gets worse and worse and worse. And how he explained it was, anxiety is there to protect us. It's that fight or flight instinct that there's a bear right, 100 feet away from us. And so that anxiety gives us that extra boost that we need to get the heck out of here or that bear's going to eat us.
Yeah.
That's what anxiety is. And so, from a evolutionary standpoint, anxiety makes sense, but the issue is that these days, the things that makes us anxious aren't seen.
Yes.
It's not that they're imaginary. It's just, it's not a bear. It's something like COVID, or it's something like, for me personally, like, there's going to be a large crowd of people and I'm not going to be able to see them. And I am going to be bumping into people and they're going to be bumping into me. And it's like you said, it's this rabbit hole of thinking that's just this cycle of negativity that you get stuck on. And so the anxiety takes hold of you. And because it feels awful, you try to push it away. And the more you do that, it just grows and grows and grows because we're not addressing it. This therapist did is he said, instead of ever trying to shove anxiety away, acknowledging it and saying, hi, here's the hello anxiety. I see you there. You're there. Let's assess what the threat is. And is the threat real? Or is it, am I going to be okay? Am I actually in danger? And what is the danger? And the more you do that, and the more you actually face that anxiety and address it and obtain tools to deal with it, it never goes away. Like you said, it's there, but it doesn't have to be debilitating.
That is so true. It doesn't have to be. And like you were talking about with your therapist, I mean, that's a great tool. And it's true. We have this fight or flight response, and a bear is something palpable. Like it will be resolved, whether he eats you or you escape.
Yeah. One way or another.
It's over. Yeah.
One way or another, it's going to be resolved.
Exactly. It's going to end. But when you're dealing with thoughts like, oh, COVID's going to kill me, or all these people are going to bump into me and, I'm going to feel unsafe. Those aren't palpable where you can reach out and touch it. And you know that there's a beginning and an end. So like you said, it just continues and continues. And until you're able to address what that trigger was, because it's not a bear, you're not going to be able to get away from that. And some advice my therapist gave me was, we have these protectors. They're just parts of ourselves. And, anxiety is a protector. And she has me imagine anxiety as kind of a character. And I imagine myself confronting this character and saying, hey, what is it, first of all, thank you for protecting me, but what is it that makes you feel like you need to fight right now and that you need to protect me?
What's the danger?
Exactly. What is the danger? And so many times you find out, well, okay, there really isn't a danger. It's your idea of the danger.
Yeah.
But it's so much easier said than done.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It is not easy to do. One of the ways that, not to catastrophize anything, but what's the worst that could happen in these sort of situations? With the bear, the worst that could happen is you get eaten.
Yeah.
The worst that could happen is, we'll use my social anxiety. Well, the worst that could happen is I'll be okay. I'm going to live. I'll survive. I'll be all right. It might be embarrassing. It might be uncomfortable, but there are things that I can do to mitigate all of the things that are causing the anxiety. And by looking at it and facing it, it makes it so that it's manageable versus it being debilitating. Because I think I told you, when I started flying after I had my vision loss, if I went to the airport, I would throw up.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
It was awful, and that's not good. And like, just going through TSA was almost unbearable because it caused me to just feel like I was having a heart attack. And now it's not that way. I love to travel, and I always have. And so that, knowing that level of anxiety was present, was getting in the way of something I really genuinely love to do. And that wasn't gonna fly. But something that popped in my head when you were talking earlier is the correlation between anxiety and depression. That anxiety can lead to being withdrawn and all kinds of other, antisocial behaviors and other things. And then, because human beings are social creatures, when we withdraw, that tends to lead to, depression and other sorts of mental health issues. And I know mine are very much tied together.
Absolutely. I didn't realize it for the longest time. I thought, I just have anxiety, and that's the opposite of depression, so I don't have to worry about being depressed. But no, they're not opposite of each other at all. They're very interconnected. And I had never suffered from depression until COVID-19. And by nature, I'm an extrovert. I love people. I love peopling. And when my anxiety took over to the point where it was just debilitating to want to even leave the house, I became very withdrawn and very by myself. And that started to lead to depression. And I didn't recognize it at the time, but I remember feeling like everything took so much effort. Like I was moving through molasses every minute of my life.
Yeah. And that's very almost identical to how I describe depression. It's like everything is in slow motion.
Yeah.
And no matter how hard you try, it doesn't make a difference. And how my anxiety plays off of that is, it's just this spiral to where I get anxious about the depression, and then the depression leads to more anxiety, and it's this cycle. And one of the things that I think therapy, or seeing a professional that is equipped to handle those types of things, it can get you off of that cycle, because you're able to interrupt it and recognize, hey, wait a second, I know what this feels like. I know what this cycle is like, and I don't want to do it. And so what my therapist is, they've given me is tools to get off that ride.
Yeah. That's a great way of putting it. It's like a ride. You're on this, or
it's like it's a small world, or it's a small world. I'm sure I know some people love that ride, but that's what it is to me.
Yeah, and it's just like, okay, get me off. It's time.
And so it's like, I want off this ride. But and one of the reasons that, I wanted to have this conversation here on this podcast is because it can be debilitating when you're in that cycle, because if you're withdrawn and you don't want to be around people, it can lead to getting in the way of your own success, your dreams, your what you want to accomplish with your own life. And while it may not be a quote unquote disability, it is debilitating.
Yes, exactly.
And it can also be a disability too. I don't want to play it down, because if for there have been times in my own life when I was in the bout of heavy depression. Working wasn't an option.
I remember that.
And I think it's important to have those conversations to where people are like, wait a second, it is not made up. It's not somebody just being sad. And I think that's a common misconception when it comes to depression. Depression is not being sad. It is a state of mind where you just can't see the light.
That is so true. I think that exactly, it's a state of mind, and
yeah,
it's not temporary. It's not fleeting all the time. Like you can be sad about an event.
Yeah.
You can be anxious about an event.
Yeah.
But when it's always present, that's something completely different, because then you're working with energy. Like, how much energy do I have to give to this situation? And you start cutting things out, like work, socializing, because it's taking everything you've got just to function through the day.
Yeah, just to get up takes all the bandwidth you have. And and I could only speak for myself and how it manifests. It's not that I don't know that there's joy and happiness and that all that other stuff exists. I know it's there, but it's impossible to find.
That's exactly.
And that's one of, I think for me personally, that's one of the things that is so horrible about it. It's not that you don't know that joy and happiness and that it's there. It's just it takes more effort and more energy than you have to get it.
Yeah, it's like we were just talking about walking through molasses.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot of effort to move like that.
Yeah. And one of the things that in the how it's viewed socially is, that the misconception that, being depressed is being sad, or, anything like that they're interchangeable, leads to a lack of empathy and a lack of compassion for people that are suffering.
Yeah.
And
it does.
Yeah. And when you feel like, what's the point of getting up? Because, it's not going to be better. And then what you hear or see, or what what you're getting out there in the universe is, well, you're just sad, get over it.
Exactly. It's the conversation like, oh, you need to toughen up.
Yeah. And when it's already taking everything you have just to get up. That it's okay, that it's normal that for that to happen sometimes, especially, mental illness can often be, especially depression, can sometimes be hereditary. I know it runs in my family.
Mine too.
And when we don't have these conversations, whether it be parents with their kids or just openly in society saying, it's okay if you have depression. It's okay if you have anxiety, but go seek help.
Exactly. And, I think we all need to realize we're in this together.
Yes.
Our society is very individualistic, and that's not human nature. We need each other. And I think that if people felt more comfortable reaching out and saying, hey, I can't do this today, I need help, I'm struggling, we all need to realize that we're all struggling in some form or fashion. And if we're more open to communication and to talking about this, we'll be able to help each other tremendously.
This concludes part 1 of my conversation with April Alexander, and I hope you will tune into our part 2, where we will conclude our conversation on this very important topic about mental health and how it intersects with disability. So this has been the Dissing My Ability podcast. I am your host, Ken Meeker. Please share, like, and subscribe. And as always, please be kind to yourself and to others. Thank you.